We're joined now by someone who actually resigned from a post at the State Department over the way the Biden administration had prosecuted the war on Hamas. We're joined by Dr. Anel Sheline, who is now a researcher at the Quincy Institute. Anel, thanks for coming on the show to talk about this.
Thank you for having me.
And so, Anel, you may have seen this Politico article, and we can put this up on the screen here. The headline was, Biden resignees are more hopeful. What was the exact headline?
More hopeful about Harris's Israel policy. That is a July 21st Politico story. And as we are talking to you, Anel, we can put F1 up on the screen. You're one of those resignees, but I think there's an open question about whether you're one of them who is, quote, hopeful.
So many people have resigned from the State Department over this policy that there's an entire now group of people that can have differing opinions. So curious where you fall down on the question of a change in, potential change in policy toward this war.
I mean, there is an opportunity right now. I think the question is who is in touch with Kamala Harris's team? And again, open question. Obviously, it's not yet totally solidified that she'll be the nominee. But assuming that she is, I know that several of my fellow resignees, we're in touch with each other. It's such a great source of support to get to work with them. We released a joint statement the week of July 4th where we were calling for a different policy. So absolutely, there's an opportunity now for a new approach. I think I'm just a little bit less inclined towards optimism, just knowing the strength of the Israel lobby in U.S. politics. I think that we are seeing a generational change. I don't think we'll continue to see this bipartisan support for this unconditional support for Israel. But I don't know that that political change is either here yet or that politicians are really plugged into it yet. I don't know that Harris and her team are plugged into it. I do think, I hope they would be, because that could help bring young people who are completely disillusioned with this policy. It could bring really critical voters, Arab American voters in critical parts of the country, the progressives. But I won't be surprised if she maintains a lot of these same policies.
Can I ask you a little bit about how the lobby actually works? So I've spoken to some State Department officials who've said that the way that it works from their perspective is if they push a little bit too hard, let's say in a meeting with Israeli counterparts, all of a sudden they will be told, hey, so the boss got a call from Ron Dermer, said that you're a little bit off the leash. Why am I hearing from Ron Dermer about you?
It's kind of chilling.
And they just tighten the leash there a little bit.
Yeah.
Is that, have you experienced that, or have you heard that type of kind of influence? Or in general, how does it actually function in practice as you're trying to do your job?
So I was with the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, or DRL, and then their Office of Near East Affairs. And I wasn't working directly on Israel-Palestine. My portfolio was different countries, but everything I was doing and trying to advocate for human rights was absolutely undermined and made essentially impossible by Israel's war on Gaza. But what I observed wouldn't have necessarily probably risen to that level, because I was, working level. But what I would see would be if there might be a shared document and you're working on it with a bunch of different people, different offices, and you're suggesting comments, and someone might put in your comment, if I had said something that was like more critical or pointing out something about Israel, someone might say in the comment, that's not going to work, or they might just erase it. And so then it's a question, well, do you escalate it? We're the Human Rights Office, so ostensibly. And to be clear, my superiors in DRL were trying to, within the sort of marginal space that they could, to push for human rights. But human rights are never the first priority of U.S. foreign policy. And so we were always outranked. We never really got to call the shots when it came to human rights in Israel or, any country other than countries that we just routinely call out, like Iran and Syria. So what I observed would probably be less, our boss got a call about you because I was too junior. It was more this internal self-censorship of other people just knowing that, like, yeah, you can't say that.
Got it.
So something interesting, you resigned in March, and in your CNN op-ed, you wrote about how some of your colleagues said, please speak for us. What are you hearing, if you can speak to that, from people who maybe are still inside official Washington capacities or working in official capacities, now that, we talked about how people like you who had already resigned are looking at a potential Harris administration? What are you hearing, if you are, from people who are still inside the government about what that might look like?
Well, people in government think Trump is going to win, and they're really scared of that, especially worried about Project 2025 and losing their jobs. I think that they're also pretty cynical about Harris, at least the folks that I'm in touch with. They don't anticipate a shift here. These are people who've spent their careers in government, and they've seen people come and go, and this policy doesn't change. This is the third rail of American politics. And so there are people now inside government who are continuing to do what they can. I know a big contingent are going to be at the protest today against Bibi. Probably, obscuring their appearance to avoid getting fired.
They got their state lanyards on.
But, I do think that many people inside government are really worried about Trump coming back, but they do see it as kind of an inevitability.
So speaking of human rights, if we could put up D3 on the screen here. I don't know if you saw this. This is a piece I published last night at Drop Site News. Leaked UN report, Israeli war has killed 366 UN staff and family members as Netanyahu prepares to address Congress. And this is the first, it's a confidential report from the UN that was leaked to us. It's the first one that has laid out the number of dependents of UN staff, so not just UN staff. And, people have been killed from UNICEF, the UN Development Program, UNRWA, the World Food Program, the World Health Organization, and also from this UN IT department. So as somebody with a human rights record, since World War II, have you ever seen so many UN workers and their families targeted and killed in a conflict before? And what does it say about what's going on the ground there?
Never. And is the Knesset, I think, just designated UNRWA a terrorist organization. This is a UN agency. And they are targeted, not only did they level these accusations against the 12 UNRWA employees such that the US withdrew funding, as did much of the rest of the world. Other countries have now reinstated some of that funding, which is good, but without US funding, UNRWA does not have the money it needs to function. And so the way that Israel has targeted the UN and designated UN agencies terrorist organizations is completely dismantling the supposed legitimacy of the UN system in ways that will have repercussions around the world. I mean, if we don't have a set of institutions, and certainly there were already issues with UN, it's not perfect, but it is what we have. Similar to international law. International law is not perfect, but the ways that Israel and the US have so directly undermined it and even used it kind of to justify what they're doing, this is going to have massive repercussions for conflicts going forward. I mean, it's sort of horrifyingly ironic because so many of these institutions were set up in the aftermath of World War II to try to prevent another Holocaust. And, I think we can't even know yet what the damage from that will be.
So that's something I think is really underappreciated in this larger conversation. And you write in your CNN op-ed about how American credibility on human rights has, I think the quote is, almost vanished from your op-ed over the course of the last 6+ months as this war has transpired. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what it might look like down the road in future conflicts? Or, for example, there's a war in Ukraine right now. How is this affecting other spaces?
I want to be clear, advocating for human rights on the behalf of the United States in the Middle East was already not easy. The
I
U.S.
would imagine.
did not have a lot of credibility there, but it was still able to engage with civil society organizations. There's, work that was done in these deeply authoritarian spaces in ways that really had an impact for people on the ground. And so it was so depressing to then meet with some of these individuals, not from Israel or Palestine, elsewhere in the region. We'd sit at a table with them, start, open the conversation about what it is that they're dealing with, the way that they're being attacked by their government. And they're like, Gaza. Gaza. Like, we want to talk about Gaza. How is this happening? How can you, this person that I have a relationship with that I know advocates for human rights, how are you letting this happen? And we'd kind of sheepishly have to say, like, this is coming from the very top. Like, you can't, this is what the president wants. And you're some, working level person at the State Department or even a undersecretary, deputy assistant secretary. You can't change that. So in terms of thinking about Ukraine, it is this sort of, it is such cruel irony that we have what Russia is doing to Ukraine in such direct juxtaposition of the U.S. reaction to that and rightful condemnation. And then the complete opposite, when Israel does even worse things to the civilian population of Gaza. And we have the U.S. saying, these international institutions are right and just in their condemnations of Russia, and then they're trying to go after, like, the families of the ICC or the ICJ prosecutor when they are have accused Netanyahu and was it Gallant of war crimes?
Yeah.
That just the hypocrisy is so blatant that I think the only thing that the U.S. could try to do to reestablish credibility on human rights would be to work to establish a state of Palestine, to actually make that happen, not pretend that that's what it's, that's been the official policy for years. But the U.S. has done nothing but provide this unconditional support for Israel, which keeps moving us further away from that and towards more violence.
In the meantime, if we can put up this F3, one of the more, I don't want to rank the shockingness that's been coming out of Gaza, but the headline here from the BBC is World Health Organization, quote, extremely worried about possible Gaza polio outbreak. There were reports in Israeli press about Israeli soldiers being vaccinated for polio before heading into assault Gaza, reports of the virus that causes polio being detected in sewage. This is a throwback to something that the world had, felt like it had defeated. What does it say to you that the WHO is now extremely worried about this potential polio outbreak?
Like you said, polio, you think of FDR, you think of a bygone era before we had vaccines that could prevent these completely preventable diseases. And, if they're having a polio outbreak, who knows what else could happen? There's no water, it's completely untreated sewage. There could be all kinds of, the population of Gaza, who knows what other diseases might be circulating there that we're just not even aware of. But the fact that the WHO had gotten so close to eliminating polio and now we're worried about an outbreak, I think it's just, like you said, it's just one more example of how shocking this conflict is.
Is there anything about the conflict that you think people maybe aren't as aware of, as somebody who actually worked in the State Department, worked in human rights issues, that we haven't covered yet? Is there something people just don't understand or should understand better?
I think a lot of people aren't sufficiently worried about the war expanding and the U.S. getting dragged in. I'm fairly sure that Bibi is going to ask, he's going to ask for more money and more weapons.
Right.
But I think he wants Congress to sign off on him going after Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Right.
And I think his objective is to enter into a war that gets Israeli civilians killed, that will try to shift this global condemnation of him and his actions against Palestinians in Gaza and try to claw back some of that sympathy that Israel had after October 7th to then justify expanding the violence. And what I'm worried about is that this will drag in the United States because the U.S. continues to pledge this unconditional support, that U.S. troops will get dragged in, and that this in some ways could be seen as election interference, that Bibi will do this right before the U.S. election. Americans are so tired of unnecessary wars in the Middle East. This could Trump could win by himself without this happening, but that could really tank the chances of whoever ends up on the Democratic ticket.
Yeah, and so, Anel, thank you so much for joining us. Very, very much appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.